Hello, I have another video for you today, and this one is about mountains. Do you remember in reading when we talked about mountains? Whether you were with me or with Miss Stevenson, we read books and talked about how mountains are formed. We also talked about the layers of the earth. So the outside layer of the earth is the crust. This brown part is the crust. That's where we stand, where you build a house, where you go to school. We live on the crust. And then the next layer is the mantle. In the mantle is the magma. Remember, magma is kind of like lava. And then you have the inner part of the earth, which is called the core. The crust is made up of 8 major tectonic plates. So let's look at plates 1 and 2. When they move together, they force the rock in between to go up and create a folded mountain. That was our first type of mountain that we learned about. We also talked about the dome mountain. The magma in the mantle sometimes builds up pressure and it pushes out onto the crust, so much so that it builds up a dome mountain. But it doesn't break through the crust. If it breaks through the crust, it creates a fault block mountain. Here, the magma from the mantle pushes up onto the crust and it breaks through, it creates cracks. And those cracks then become little blocks that have to settle as the magma cools into a mountain. The underwater mountain is when magma from the mantle comes up either through a plate or between 2 plates like 6 and 7 here. And when the magma comes out into the water, it cools and hardens, cools and hardens, cools and hardens over and over until you have an underwater mountain. The last kind of mountain we talked about was the volcanic mountain. There are 2 ways a volcanic mountain can be formed. The first one was if one plate, like plate 5, slides under another plate like plate 6. When plate 5 slides under plate 6, it enters the magma of the mantle and it starts to melt. And that melted plate has to go somewhere. So it ends up coming back out through plate 6 and creating a volcano. Over here, this is all plate 7, but there's a weak spot in the plate where the magma pushes out through that weak spot and creates a volcano. Over spring break, I started reading this book, and I finished it recently. And in this book, it talks about a third way that a volcanic mountain can form. That third way is called a Mantle Plume volcano. I'm going to read to you what I learned about a Mantle Plume volcano because it's not one that we talked about in reading. This says, the vast majority of volcanoes are formed from shifting tectonic plates, and the magma comes from fairly close to the surface of the earth. So we knew that. Here are tectonic plates. If they shift together, they can form a folded mountain. And the magma for a dome mountain or a fault block mountain comes from the mantle, which is right underneath the crust. Rarely, they're fueled by magma directly from the Earth's core. Volcanoes formed directly from the Earth's core are called mantle plumes. So instead of coming straight just from the mantle into the volcano, the lava that comes out of a mantle plume volcano came all the way from the core of the earth. The main character of this book says, I've read through this book that he's reading, but it doesn't completely explain the differences between volcanoes formed from mantle plumes and volcanoes formed by tectonic plates, or plate tectonics. So here, this volcano was formed because one tectonic plate slid under another one. This volcano was formed because there was a weak spot in the tectonic plate, but this one doesn't have anything to do with the tectonic plate. It came from the core. The teacher that he's asking says, for one thing, volcanoes formed from mantle plumes are generally much larger. As you probably know, mantle plumes originate at the center of the earth. They begin as a relatively narrow pipe at the core and expand into a giant mushroom head by the time they approach the earth's surface. Most of them are massive, up to 2,000 kilometers in diameter. One of the biggest and most famous mantle plumes is responsible for creating the entire Hawaiian Islands chain. That means that all of the islands in Hawaii were created from one mantle plume, this part right here, that became a volcano, that when the lava came out and it cooled and it hardened and became an island that is now Hawaii. Some people theorize, that means they guess or they think, that a mantle plume could cause a massive tectonic uplift powerful enough to break apart a continent. The continent we live on is North America. It's made up of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And so some people think that a mantle plume can create a volcano that's powerful enough to break up our continent. If you would like to draw and color the types of mountains like I have, these are the colors I used. I used yellow for the inner core of the earth. I used orange for the outer core of the earth. I used red to color the mantle. I used brown for the crust. And then on the crust, there's trees and grass, and there's also water and ocean. I hope you enjoyed learning about our new Mantle Plume volcano, and I hope that you and your families are safe and sound at home.